Hey everyone, thanks for coming by again. Thanks for everyone who came by yesterday and watched my video, and all the new subscribers that I got today. And I think we're up to 36 now, so thanks everyone again. Now, so today's video is going to be about the 11 NHL teams in existence that have not won a Stanley Cup yet. And it's pretty interesting because the 31 teams that are in the league, like that's a third of the league that hasn't won. And it seems like every year a team is winning that hasn't won and gets it done. And this list was obviously cut short with the St. Louis Blues and the Washington Capitals recently winning. So it was actually 13 recently. Now, first on this list is the Buffalo Sabres. They have played in 2 Stanley Cup finals, one in 1975 and one in 1999. And the most famous one, obviously, was 1999 because of the controversy, how they lost with Brett Hull's foot in the crease when that rule was around at the time, and the backlash and Lindy Ruff saying no goal and everything, and not being able to review the call. But that a lot of Sabres fans feel as if that was where they should have won their Stanley Cup, which they would have had to force a Game 7, but anything can happen, right? So maybe this would have been the Sabres not being on this list had that not happened. Now, second up is the Vancouver Canucks, and this one's pretty fresh in recent memory for a lot of people in general that have watched hockey over the last 10-15 years. It was 2011 was their most recent loss, when they lost in 7 games to the Boston Bruins, and that one really sticks in people's minds because of the riots afterwards in Vancouver, and it was pretty much a carbon copy of what happened in 1994 when they lost to the New York Rangers. So 2 Stanley Cup final losses against 2 different teams, and high expectations for both the teams, and especially I'd say for the 2011 Vancouver Canucks with how skilled that team was. They definitely should have won that, and especially the fact that they had a 2-0 series lead. And again, I remember watching that year, and they were saying that over 80% of teams that take a 2-0 series lead in the final win, and that wasn't the case. Then Boston Bruins rallied and got their cup, and that was their first cup since the early 70s. Now, the San Jose Sharks have never won a Stanley Cup. They have one Stanley Cup final appearance, which again was very recent, 2016. They lost to the Pittsburgh Penguins en route to their first of 2 Stanley Cups for the Penguins in that 2-year span. And it's a really big surprise that the San Jose Sharks haven't been able to get it done. And it's actually surprising that they've only made 1 finals appearance too, because they've had very strong teams over the course of, I'd say, 2008 to around now. And I know they're not strong right now, but they have had some teams that were definitely capable of going to the Stanley Cup final, and especially them being teams that were dominating in the first and second round and executing sweeps in the playoffs. It's a big surprise that they're still on this list, and you got to wonder how many more years they're going to be on this list. Second up is the Florida Panthers. They made their first and only Stanley Cup final in 1996, and they lost in the Stanley Cup final to the Colorado Avalanche, which was Colorado's first Stanley Cup. Uwe Krupp scored the overtime winner, and that ended the sweep. The big story of that series was definitely goaltending. Patrick Waugh versus Van Beesbrook. He was one of my favorite goalies to see on the internet and everything, because obviously I wasn't alive in 1996, so I wasn't able to watch that, but his equipment and his goalie mask is kind of what goalies model their masks after today. And the Panthers were a great story that year just because of the absolute, it was like a vintage Cinderella story of how they weren't supposed to be there, and everyone knew they didn't have a chance against Colorado, especially when they were down 3-0, and they went a couple overtimes to eventually lose, but they had so much respect for the Panthers because of how new of an organization they were. Next up is the Arizona Coyotes / Phoenix Coyotes, because when they had their best season, they were the Phoenix Coyotes, and that was in 2012 when they lost in the Western Conference Final in overtime to the LA Kings, which LA Kings moved on to the final to win their first Stanley Cup and getting them off this list. And as everyone knows, that was their best season, and they have not been back to the playoffs until this year, which was a play-in round. They had a really strong year this year to start, and then they really tapered off, and I think the play-in round helped them get into the playoffs. It really helped them get into the playoffs. I don't think they really deserve to be there. That's just my opinion, but they definitely weren't probably going to get themselves off this list this year. And being having all the drama that's happened out in the desert there with the NHL bailing them out and ownership changes and playing their location where they're playing changing multiple times, it's amazing that they are actually able to string together some pretty successful seasons. And their fans there are the kind that if nothing is exciting and nothing's going on and they're not doing well, they're not going to show up. And even when they're doing well during the regular season, they have a problem filling that place. And so they rely heavily on having to have successful seasons and playoff runs. Now the Nashville Predators have had their first Stanley Cup final appearance in the last couple of years, 2017. They lost to the Pittsburgh Penguins, and it was in 6 games, which still keeps them on this list, and I think the window isn't fully closed for them. I wouldn't be surprised if they got everything together and had a really good year and playoffs. They've always been great at making the playoffs, but going far has been something that they have disappointed in the past. But more recent on this latter half of the decade, 2015 to 2010, 2015 to 2020, they were really starting to get a little further. Conference finals, and then finally broke through the final. So we'll see if maybe they can get off this list and get a Stanley Cup for Nashville. Now, the Winnipeg Jets, they have never won a Stanley Cup as any rendition of the team. The original Winnipeg Jets never won, and obviously the Atlanta Thrashers / Winnipeg Jets of today have not won. But the Jets did find some success. They lost in the Western Conference Final to the Vegas Golden Knights en route to their first Stanley Cup appearance, which leaves Vegas on this list, and we'll get to them in a minute. But Winnipeg Jets definitely have a team that is 100% capable of getting themselves off this list and getting a Stanley Cup. Now, the Minnesota Wild, I've had a lot of opinions on the Minnesota Wild. They're probably one of the most mediocre, boring teams to watch, and it's not that they can't win games or put a good season together. It's not about them being a good or bad team. It's that they have never really had the consistent offensive talent. They are one of those teams that reminds me of the New Jersey Devils, where they would score a goal and clog up the neutral zone, play a 1-3-1 style, and suck the life out of the game. So if you can get the wins, then it works, but it's not always the best hockey to watch. Now, they haven't ever went to the Stanley Cup final. They've only been around for 18 years, and they have plenty of time to get it done. And I think they've really turned a corner in the way of management with Bill Guerin being there and actually committing to some form of rebuild. And they have some very difficult contracts there that they have with Brian Suter and Zach Parise. Some long-term ones that are going to be hard to get rid of, but they are restocking the prospect cupboard, which is important if you want to get yourself off this list in the future. Now, the Columbus Blue Jackets, they just recently won their first playoff series 2 years ago, and I believe it was their 5th playoff appearance. And they had some unlucky times where they just were meeting up against some really heavy Pittsburgh Penguins teams, and Pittsburgh would pretty much just sweep them aside. There was one year where it was a little interesting, and Columbus had back and forth, and I think they just took Columbus for granted, but when they met up with them again, they swept them, and finally this year, Columbus, although it was the play-in round, they did beat the Leafs, and I do think they have a good core. I think they just need to figure out who needs to be around that core, especially with Bobrovsky and Panarin being gone. But their goaltending situation with Elvis Merzlikins is looking better, and with Korpisalo, probably one of them is going to end up going to Seattle. But it's a matter of who they're going to want to keep around. And I think this season will be a proving season for their goaltending. And if they can get that goaltender and keep developing players like Pierre-Luc Dubois, I think they'll be able to go deep in the playoffs year after year and maybe get off the list. Now, the Vegas Golden Knights, they made the Stanley Cup Final, first one in their first year, and lost to the Washington Capitals. Everyone knows that if you're a fan of hockey. Everyone was paying attention to it because it was so unprecedented, because the way that they went to the final as an expansion team was never seen before, because expansion teams are always thought of as inferior, and that's usually because the expansion draft works in a different way, but it worked differently this time around, where deals were being swung and they were being given contracts to swallow in exchange for not taking certain players. And so it wasn't a surprise in the end. I mean, when you looked at the roster on opening night, there were some players that caught your eyes, but it took a lot of players having career highs. And now injecting players like Mark Stone, Pacioretty, Pietrangelo, they're a great team. And I think, like I said, I think next couple of years they're definitely going to get it done. Now, the last team on the list, the 11th one, is the Ottawa Senators. They were founded in the late 1800s. I don't have the exact year in front of me, but they won 11 Stanley Cups between, I believe it was 1890 and 1918 or something like that. But that was when they weren't the Ottawa Senators of today. They went on a long, long hiatus of not being in the league up until 1992. They were re-established as the Ottawa Senators, and since 92 they have not won a Stanley Cup. They do have a Cup final appearance, which they made the best of, but they shot themselves in the foot. If you watch the highlights of Game 7, or pardon me, not Game 7, I believe it was Game 6 that they were in, and they ended up scoring on their own net, and that pretty much sealed the deal because the Ducks were so strong and they smelled blood. So that was as far as the Senators ever got. But they did have a great conference final run a couple years ago in 2017 against the Penguins, losing in overtime. Could have went either way. We could have been talking about the Senators getting their first Stanley Cup, and it would have been an interesting matchup, because that year it would have been the Ottawa Senators and the Nashville Predators, which one of those teams would have been off this list today. Now, just thinking about course of history, how that could have changed is pretty interesting to think about. So, that's all 11 teams right now that do not have Stanley Cups. Comment down below which one you think is going to get off this list first, and whether you're a fan of them or you have a real reason of why you think, or maybe you like the direction they're going in, maybe you like the players they have. Which one do you think is going to win a Stanley Cup, and which season do you think it's going to be? Alright, I'm just going to wrap this one up. Thanks everyone who came by and liked, comment, and subscribed, and I'll see you in the next one.